Hello everyone, I'm Heath, and in this video we are continuing to take a look at changes that I had brought up to at least potentially evaluate for the 5th edition Dungeons & Dragons rule set back when we were trying to decide what type of rule set we were going to use for Journey to the Tree of Sorrows, which was a medieval Viking Cthulhu Mythos RPG. And in the end for that, we decided to go with 5th edition rules basically as they were for that for a variety of different reasons, but now that I'm trying to develop my own rule sets for my own worlds, I thought it was a good idea to take a look at some of my thinking on 5th edition so I can completely come at it again fresh to decide what really is the best system to be used for these worlds and do we need to come up with our own. So actually in this video, we're going to be taking a look at the d20. And of course, arguably, the d20 is one of the most fundamental parts of Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition and Dungeons & Dragons prior to that as well, because in many ways, Dungeons & Dragons and the roll of a 20-sided dice is kind of synonymous. We've been rolling 20-sided dice for attacks for a long time, and of course, now we roll 20-sided dice for all kinds of skill checks and attribute checks and all of that as well. But I've always felt, and I am not the first person to have realized this or commented about this online, but I have always thought, when I'm sitting down to play, that, boy, the skill of my character in any particular whatever is going on is not a huge contributing factor to whether or not that character is going to be successful at any given task, given that most modifiers to rolls in Dungeons & Dragons are +1, +2, +3, +4. I mean, we might sometimes get to +5, right? But I mean, in general, we're talking about +1s, +2s, +3s, +4s, +5s to our rolls, right? And okay, yes, just checking on that. For instance, the proficiency bonus of the cleric right here, looking at all levels from 0 to 20, they start at +2, you've got +3. Okay, so you do get up to +6 at 17th, 18th, 19th, and 20th level. But by and large, even there, okay, a +6, even at the highest level of proficiency that a Dungeons & Dragons character is going to have, that's going to be adding +6 to a roll where you are rolling a 20-sided die, which can have 1 to 20 results, all in equal frequency, right? So in those cases, if you've got a +2 or a +3 or a +4 to your roll someplace in there, the bonus that you're getting because of your proficiency and the circumstances and all of that is being far overwhelmed by that roll of the d20. 1 to 20, all in equal probability across 1 to 20. It doesn't give you a very good feeling for exactly how good or how skilled your character is because there is such wild random fluctuation in the d20. And so also that's another reason why when you're at the Dungeons & Dragons table, if you're trying to figure out whether something might be a +2 modifier or a +3 modifier or even a +4 modifier someplace in there, chances are that doesn't matter all that much because you're going to be rolling a d20 and it's going to be overwhelmed by the randomness anyway. I mean, what's the difference between a +2 and a +4? It's only 10%, right? For instance, if you have to roll above a 15, for instance, what has the most influence on your ability to roll over that 15? Is it your +2 bonus or a +3 bonus, or is it the roll of a d20? Well, overwhelmingly, it's the roll of the d20. And if you want to calculate all of that out statistically, you can. But, if you've got a +2 or a +3, that's only a 5% difference in the outcome, possible 5% difference in the outcome. So that don't spend a whole lot of time at the table trying to figure out, is my modifier +2 or +3? Because in the end, it's just a 5% change in the probability, probably going to be a wash anyway. And I am of the opinion that if you're going to be rolling the dice, you want the roll of the dice to be influential. It means you're rolling for something that is actually significant in the game. And also, I want the character's skill and the situation that the character is put in, or that they put themselves into in order to have some kind of advantage at actually accomplishing whatever task is at hand. You want that to be a much more decisive factor rather than the random roll. Now, I do think the random roll is important because there is a tendency to start going into, okay, let's tally +1 for this, +1 for that, +2 for this, +1 for that, -1 for that, -2 for that. And I do understand that because I do definitely come out of a simulationist kind of background. Now, I'm moving away from that. Not there's anything wrong with that, but I'm personally moving away from that for the style of games that I'm trying to play. But I do think that the roll of the dice is important for that because the dice are there to represent all other factors that we are not considering at the table personally as the player or the game master. When we're trying to tally up all of these bonuses, I think there basically needs to be a relatively defined set of bonuses or let's say modifiers in general, because it could be negatives, it's not just a bonus, but a modifier that we need to be addressing. These are the things that the game is going to be addressing. Then, yes, there may be some things that are outside of that. Sometimes they may be good, sometimes they may be bad, but that's what the dice are supposed to be representing. The dice will be taking care of everything else that isn't part of the core modifiers that we are trying to use and really considering for the game. But that means that the random element needs to be there, but it doesn't need to be so overwhelming in the game as I feel the d20 is. So when we were thinking about different things regarding the 5th edition system, this is what I wrote in favor of a 2d10 system to everybody who was on the development team. I said, instead of using a single d20 for rolls in the game, rolling 2d10 would reduce randomness by producing a bell curve distribution to the rolls. This puts more emphasis on the player's skill rather than good or bad rolls and lets them know how good at something they can reliably be expected to be. Reductions in randomness should be good for players as well in the long term. They are the ones who are having the most dice thrown against them on a per capita basis by bad guys who, with relatively low skill, often use luck to score hits against the PC. And I think considering luck here is important because I think as I've been expressing my general game design philosophy in other videos here, I've been talking about how I had wanted to generally try to remove randomness from games. In the past, I've had more randomness in games, and that's the place. But on the whole, I want if the players do figure out the correct sequence of steps to successfully achieve some kind of goal, I want them to be able to achieve the goal and not fail because of some random roll of the dice. Because I want to reward good thinking, good planning, good strategy, and if the good thinking, good planning, and good strategy is overwhelmed by the roll of a die, and oh yeah, you did think of everything, you did plan everything correctly, you did everything right, and then it still doesn't go your way, I think that is harmful to the game because it damages players' psyche, right? I did everything I was supposed to do, we did everything right, and in the end it didn't matter. And I don't like that. That's why I think a reduction in randomness is generally better across the game because you want to encourage people, when they do get everything right, to be able to get the reward from that. So we can look at some any dice tables here. And so this is the output for 1d20, and you can see how flat it is. So if you have never used any dice before, you go to anydice.com, and I just put in a very simple kind of a line here, output 1d20, and then it shows you all the statistics from that die roll. And you can get very complicated with what you type in here in order to come up with different dice rolls. But I just said 1d20, and as you can see, there's no real way to know what you are expecting to roll with a 1d20. And though some people will say, well, your average roll is something like 10.5. But here is where the average, if you take all of your possible results, then divide by the possible results, and you get, oh, the average is 10.5, that doesn't mean that you can expect to roll a 10.5 when you roll a d20. You could be all over the place. And so I have, this is the 2d10 right here. And so you can see this is kind of pyramidal, and we could get into a whole bunch of statistical discussion about what does it mean to be bell curved or more pyramidal and things like that. And that's great to have for a statistical discussion. But I think not so necessary right here. You can see that if you're rolling 2d10, the random element that you are adding to whatever's going on is generally going to be the roll of a 10, 11, or 12. That's going to be happening 38% of the time. And then by the time you get out to 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, or 13, I think you're at 44% of the time you're going to be in that range. So, it'd be nice if you were up at 50, but, this is much better over the 1d20 system. So you do have some kind of expectation about what is it I'm going to be rolling on these dice? And then I've got my modifier to it, so I know exactly what level I can kind of expect to have. So 44% of the time, I'm going to be adding an 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, or 13 to this roll. So what does that mean? 56% of the time you're going to be outside of that range. So 26% of the time you're going to be low, and 26% you're going to be high. To me, that's still pretty random, but I think it's much better than a 1d20 system. Now, we can take a look at 3d6. I have that up here as well. This is the output of 3d6, and this one is much more bell-shaped, And of course, I do have an affinity for 3d6 because I played GURPS for a long time, and that's one of the first systems that I was familiar with. So rolling 3d6 in order to get its bell curve is something that I've definitely been familiar with, and so I'm personally comfortable with. Now, GURPS is not a roll dice and then add the modifier to it. You are always trying to roll under a given number, a success number. So that changes things right there, at least as far as the feel goes, but I think some of the math and things as well. But nonetheless, you could move to a 3d6 system, and then you would get this much more bell-curved like thing. And then we could say, what am I really expecting to be able to add to a roll if it's 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13? So checking that, we find out that 67.58% of the time, we're going to be adding an 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, or 13 to the roll. That's basically what we can be expected to roll 67% of the time. I like that, personally. So maybe a 3d6 is actually better to go with than 2d10. Now, there are then things that you want to think about as far as game mechanically. What are you rolling? What are people going to be adding up? Is it better to have them roll 3d6, or is it better to have them roll 2d10? But on the other hand, the numbers that the 3d6 give you, saying that, listen, 67% of the time, so more than 2/3 of the time, you're going to be expected to roll an 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, or 13. And then that means that 1/3 of the time you're going to be rolling outside of that. And so something like, 16.5% of the time you'll be rolling lower than that, and 16.5 times you'll be rolling higher than that. So you'll be able to do things that you wouldn't be able to otherwise. I did want to be sure that I included what the book Unearthed Arcana from the 3rd edition of Dungeons & Dragons had to say about a bell curved, which would be like a 2d10 system, when you include it in Dungeons & Dragons. I'm on page 132 of Unearthed Arcana, and it says, "Behind the curtain, the bell curve. In general, this variant leads to a grittier D&D game, which, on the whole, I'm happy to have grittier games, because there will be far fewer very good or very bad rolls. Not only can you no longer roll 1, 2, 19, or 20, but most rolls will be clustered around the average of 10.5. With a d20, every result is equally likely," right, which is what we were trying to fix here. "You have a 5% chance of rolling an 18 and a 5% chance of rolling a 10, which does sound like not what you might want for a game, but nonetheless, that's what Dungeons & Dragons has. But then with 3d6, there is only one possible combination of dice that results in an 18, 3 sixes, obviously, but there are 24 combinations that result in a 10. Players used to the thrill of rolling high and the agony of rolling a 1 will get that feeling less often, but it may be more meaningful when it does happen. And I would personally like that. Let's make it more meaningful when those extreme rolls happen." Then it says, "Good dice rolls are a fundamental reward of the game, and it changes the character of the game when the rewards are somewhat stronger but less frequent." And that's what I would challenge about your game design mechanic. Here you are saying that good dice rolls are a fundamental reward of the game, but you don't have any control over rolling good dice. That's just something that happens. So what I might say is good player choices, or good player choices on behalf of the characters, are a fundamental reward of the game. So I'm challenging here this idea that, well, yes, is it true that just rolling the dice well is a fundamental reward of the game? I want to shift that back to player choice. But nonetheless, it says here, good dice rolls are a fundamental reward of the game, and it changes the character of the game when the rewards are somewhat stronger but less frequent. Game balance shifts subtly when you use the bell curve variant. Rolling 3d6 gives you a lot more average rolls, which favors the stronger side in combat, and in a D&D game, that's almost always the PCs. Many monsters, especially low CR monsters encountered in groups, rely heavily on lucky shots to damage the PCs. And I do think that's true. When you've got a whole bunch of kobolds attacking the PCs, you're rolling a whole bunch of attack rolls against the players, and they are basically the kobolds are trying to score lucky hits. They're relying on luck to damage the PCs. When rolling 3d6, those lucky shots are fewer and farther in between. In a fair fight in which everyone rolls a 10, the PC should win almost every time. The bell curve variant adheres more tightly to that average, which is the reason behind the reduction in CR for monsters encountered in groups. They're talking about variant rules here. Another subtle change to the game is that the bell curve variant rewards bonuses relatively more and the die roll relatively less, which to me is an advantage, simply because the die roll is almost always within a few points of 10. The character's skill ranks, ability scores, and gear have a much bigger impact on success and failure than they do in the standard D&D rules. And to me, that would be all to the good. but here's the recognition of it in this game book. You know, I like that because I think it does give you a much better expectation of what you can do, because I always hate it. I hate it when the random element of the d20 kills you during the game. So I am definitely a proponent of systems that use multiple dice like this in order to generate a bell curve. Or, of course, there are other systems which use dice pools as well. And we were looking at some of them. We were looking at the Codex system specifically as it was manifesting inside the Tales of Xadia RPG. That's a very interesting and very different kind of system. So there are a lot of different ways that we can go, and I kind of think that just the 1d20 system, 1d20 roll, is not the way that I want to go for systems that I would be having in the future. So what do you think? Please let me know. Please write it down in the comment section. I would love to hear what you think. And in the meantime, if you have enjoyed this video, please like, subscribe, all of that. But also, please do go back to my YouTube channel, Heath's Tabletop and Fantasy. I've got a lot of other videos, about 150 videos right now, on tabletop gaming and the fantasy genre. And if you've enjoyed this video, you might enjoy them as well. I look forward to seeing you and many more to come. Later.